Hello everyone and welcome to another Guild Wars 2 video. Today we're going to go over the first episode of the Living World Season 2, which is, I guess you could call it the Gates of Maguuma is the other name for it. To start, I'm going to give like a quick summary of what happens throughout this episode. So this update begins with you, the player character, receiving a letter from E. E is the person who, for instance, alerted us that you should be present for Dragon Bash because something was going to happen during it. And he or she, we don't actually know, is a very well-informed person who seems to be able to drop hints to you and Marjorie usually, letting you know when something's about to happen. And E sends you a letter saying you need to go to Maguuma, there's going to be some really weird things in the Maguuma jungle and yada yada yada. So you get the band together, hop in your van and go down to the southwest corner of Brisbane Wildlands. And once you're there, you reach like a Seraph outpost that's being set up, which you have several Seraph working away at cutting through some thorns to go further into the Maguuma. Once you arrive, you talk to the corporal of the Seraph, who basically says, yeah, sure, we appreciate any of the help we can get and come tag along. Marjorie's sister is there, and then the Inquest begin attacking. So the first little story instance is you defending the Seraph outpost from the Inquest, eventually defeating several of the Inquest and defeating a golem that they drop in, kind of like an airdrop. It's kind of cool. Once that is complete, the Seraph have been able to chop through the vines that are covering the zone portal, and you can move on to Dry Top. Marjorie's sister Belinda, however, does not go on with you into the Maguuma jungle, as she is tasked to go back to Fort Salma, which is in Kessex Hills, to make sure reinforcements come through and to oversee basically to keep the vines back on the camp to make sure that there's a retreat if needed. As soon as you zone into the new zone, which is Dry Top, you're treated to the site of the Zephyrite airship, which has been wrecked and has crashed, and debris is scattered all throughout the landscape, with many of the Zephyrite scattered around. You meet all your friends again over most of the wreckage of the Zephyrite airship, and you form a plan which is basically that you, Casimir, and Marjorie, as the lightest of the group, we'll go forward into the wreckage and try to find some of the Zephyrite survivors to try and figure out what happened and what's caused this giant calamity. As you go forward, you run into many of the Inquest as well as several of their devices, which are intended to block any magic that would enable you to get around. And eventually you come upon Morning. Morning has been mortally wounded either during the crash of the airship or by the Inquest afterwards, but she is able to inform you and Casimir and Marjorie the Master of Peace, which is the leader of the Zephyrites, is in danger and that someone is trying to kill him. When Casimir asks, do you know why someone would want to kill him, she evades it and then ends up dying, which Casimir points out she is definitely lying during that little time period at the end before she dies. You continue up to the top of the cliff to a little plateau which has several more clues that provide you with a good picture of what happened on the Zephyrite ship before it went down. There's one area with several dead merchants which all have stab wounds from the same blade and which have defensive stab wounds, meaning they tried to fight back but they were able to be killed anyways. So one person, with the way it looks, was able to kill all of the merchants that you find, which is like 4 or 5 of them, while they were trying to defend themselves, so that he didn't just jump them and kill them. So it's a person who is pretty well trained with blades. The second clue you find is a fragment of the supposed assassin's journal. And in this journal it has something of a soundless teaching, which if you know from Sylvari, which my character was a Sylvari, so he jumped on it really quick. The soundless are Sylvari who, they're not Nightmare Court, but they're not Pale Tree Sylvari. They're Pale Tree Sylvari who decide they want nothing to do with the dream, and so they meditate in themselves and cut themselves off completely from the dream. So whoever this is after the Master, it looks like 1, it's a Sylvari, and 2, it's a soundless Sylvari, and the name is Aaron, which sounds like a male name. The next clue you find is some of the wreckage from the Zephyrite ship, which has some old burn marks on it. Now, a lot of the ship's on fire, considering it just crashed into the ground, but these burn marks seem to indicate that it was something that was on fire before the ship went down. So this would seem to indicate that there was some type of explosive device which was set off in the ship midair, which of course is what made it crash. The last clue is a very armed and armored Zephyrite, which is like an elite guard, which is probably the guard to the Master of Peace. You're able to find their body with blast markings and scorches all over the body, which of course would seem to suggest that once again the person who's after them is a very trained person who uses explosives and is able to kill anyone who's defending them, trying to defend and get in the way. Once you put together all the clues, you talk to Marjorie and you basically conclude we need to track down the Master of Peace. And where would you go if you were in this situation? Which would be to the nearby town. So you go to the nearby town to try and track down some clues after the Master of Peace came through, while Marjorie and Casimir kind of finish up there. Once you arrive at the town and look around, you find the body of a dead merchant. And once you inspect the merchant, you realize that it's the same type of blade wound as what killed all of the merchants you found up in the cliff. After finding the body of the dead merchant, you go around to ask some of the locals, trying to find out if anyone knows the merchant or saw what happened to him. And you end up talking to Ilana. She mentions that she saw the merchant that you found dead selling supplies to the Zephyrite, and not an hour later they were found dead just for trying to cross paths with them and sell him supplies. You ask her if she saw which way the Zephyrite went, and she said he went into this canyon. Follow him that way. As you go that way, you find some pages from the Zephyrite, like history books, I guess you could say, which give you more background once again into how the Zephyrites found Glint's legacy, which is her body, and used it to make the aspect crystals, and so on and so forth, and gives you just general background we know about them from time. Following the literal paper trail, you end up in another story instance meeting together with the full gang. After time you busting your way through some vines, you meet Aaron. Aaron arrives looking around for the Master of Peace and muttering to himself, as well as basically sounding like a crazy kook. You fight him for a while, with him jumping around and being annoying, until he eventually turns and runs, going through some of the vines which part for him and close after him. As he goes, he continues to speak to himself and answer himself as if there's a voice in his head which basically is telling him what to do at the moment. After you get through this first set of vines, it should be noted that you fight a set of enemies that not only includes the jungle tendrils, which have been showing up a lot more lately, but also a fern hound and a husk, both of which are referred to as an overgrown husk and overgrown wolves. After trapezing through the whole canyon area and fighting Aaron in one more little skirmish, you end up in the last room of the instance, where Aaron and the Master of Peace both meet. Master of Peace basically tells Aaron that he's broken his Zephyrite vows. Aaron responds with, "Oh, those are worthless. I've seen the bigger picture, and you're in the way." And yeah, so then the fight starts. After that, you must fight Aaron, which is a pretty simple fight if you're ranged at least, because you just have to avoid his giant bombs and his grenades. Eventually just having to stop to break his shield when he gets to around 50-ish% health. You continue to fight Aaron, eventually leading to you beating and killing him. The Master of Peace thanks you for your help and says that he's sorry you had to get involved, stating that Aaron started losing his mind on the ship, and he's the one that, of course, sabotaged it. And the reason he was chasing the Master was because he wanted him to give him power that he couldn't handle. Casimir then offers to escort the Master back, which he responds with, "No, I'm going to journey onward, and just tell them that I'm safe and that I'm continuing on. And also, they won't need to know where I'm going, because the ones who don't already know where I'm going know better than to ask. Be well, I'm glad our paths crossed today." After that, he runs off to like the northwestern direction from that area. Marjorie says we should probably search his body and then go back to Prosperity to see if there's any clues maybe about him that would point us to give us more direction. They also point out that his rambling reminds them of Scarlet and that it's kind of disconcerting to see it again. After searching him, you notice that there's a bunch of straw on him, so you say, hey, we should probably talk to someone in town, like Marjorie just said. And you also find a half of a piece of a paper, which the half of the piece says, "Leader will die, the rest will fall in line, we will not fail." Once that's over, you go back to the town of Prosperity and begin asking the locals around to see if they've talked to any crazy Sylvari or seen them lately. As you talk to them, they begin to say, "Yeah, we've seen that crazy Sylvari, but she hasn't been here in a long time." When you tell them that you were looking for a he, they go, "Oh no, this Sylvari, which had this crazy hair, had this house right over here. She was an engineer and did all this other weird stuff in." So you meet the whole gang once again back in front of that house, and you decide you're going to break into it, because it's very obviously Scarlet that they're all talking about. So you, Mr. Macho Man, bust down the door to her house and go on in. Inside, there are a ton of interactable items, which several of them are very interesting, including a book by Snaff relating basically saying the relation between minds and magic, and that the only thing that basically separates a mind from being able to do something is belief that it can do something. Another book is basically Omad's book talking about ley lines as well as minds and magic being linked, and how he likes his apprentice and hopes that she doesn't go insane when he uses the device on her. The last book is The Nature of Dragons by Ogden Stonehealer, which is basically saying, yeah, the Elder Dragons have been around for as long as we know, at least have woken up twice before, and no one really knows how long they've been alive because everyone's basically died that's happened through that, except for some little stories that have been passed down by the Jotun and the Norn. There's several other documents scattered around, for instance, blueprints for some weird coffin with tentacles is what your character describes it as, which it doesn't even look like that to me in the picture, but hey, what do I know? And also a diagram which is a circle, what her vision of the eternal alchemy was, with the pale tree at the middle, which several people have been linking to a picture that shows the realm of torment and how it looks very similar to it. I'm not sure how much that ties in. It does look similar, but it's because there's 6 circles on the outside in the same location as the realm of torment, but the middle is the pale tree instead of it being the 4 other parts of the realm of torment. Timey then discovers what's basically an early prototype steam creature, steam minotaur to be exact, that's been left in the workshop, and of course freaks out a little bit and basically says you won't understand what's wrong with it because you're stupid, because I'm not an engineer. Apparently if you're an engineer it does more conversation, but it's flavor. It's really nice flavor that she recognizes you're an engineer, but it's flavor. The last thing which the story points out to you is a journal of Scarlet's, which is a diary right before she went over to holograph recording, which is most of what we have from Scarlet is recorded holographs. The diary basically says, yay, I've picked up this holograph thing I'm going to use to record my journals from now on. The diary basically says, yay, this is my last time I'm ever going to record something in paper because I have this great hologram thing and it's time to move on. And I believe that I have discovered one of the mystical ley lines, and if I'm able to understand it, if I can study it, maybe I'll be able to better understand how Tyria's inner workings work, and I'll be able to learn more. After that, the whole gang, besides Timey, decide to move on because they have more important things to do. Timey is able to convince them basically to not tell Inspector Keel about all of this because she'll just come in and take all the evidence. And so Timey is left behind going through Scarlet's things to try and uncover more of her motives, as well as to probably take some of her inventions and make her thesis about all of this stuff. There's a few other bits and bobs that are scattered around the house that are sort of interesting. But the most interesting is the hologram diary, which is able to be used after the whole cutscenes end. In this diary, Scarlet, before she became Scarlet, outlines her whole plan of what she's been doing and how she made the steam creatures and made the steam portals which they use. And then the steam creatures were able to develop their own intelligence and start doing stuff on their own, of their own initiative, and building their own portals and building their own steam creatures, which she's stupid because she made AI and let it loose. And then saying basically, oh well, I don't need them anymore, so I sent them to Lornar's Pass and Brisbane Wildlands, so whatever. The last couple entries basically say how she's excited and that she's going to be going into the Omad's machine tomorrow. And then they say, I have seen everything, with a corrupted, like, weird voice to it. Her personality changes, the tone of her voice changes, and also the hologram thing sounds corrupted when she does it. And then that's all you get from the hologram thing, which there's probably more, but Timey always resets it at one certain point. After this, you try to go and find a miner who is supposedly the one who found this ley line, which you end up talking to Tosca the miner, who talks about how when she was mining for copper at one point, she hit this weird pocket of magical energy, and then they just kind of dug around it. When she told Scarlet about this, Scarlet got obviously very excited and came back to it, and all of a sudden that tunnel ended up collapsing later. And no one's ever gone and dug the tunnel back up. Which the tunnel was west of town, by the way. She mentions that after the tunnel caved in, she kind of suspected that Scarlet dug her own way into the tunnel and to go ask her about it, because maybe she'd know, which of course she's dead. And with that, episode 1 of Living Story season 2 is over. So now for the fun part, the speculations. I think I'm going to go by character basis here, and so let's start with Aaron. Now, I don't know if you've tried to pay attention if you've been on during the last couple months, but Aaron was present during the Labyrinthine Cliffs parts, and he was walking around the Zephyrite ship, really excited, really excited to be able to be part of the Zephyrites, talking constantly, saying he was going to try and help them out with whatever, and he was going to write down all of his experiences to share with any Sylvari who were soundless and cut off from the dream, and on and on and on and on. So how does this Aaron, which you find now, which is an insane Sylvari, a lot like Scarlet, who is trying to kill the Master of Peace, who is also very adept with daggers and explosives, how do we get from that first Aaron to this one? Well, I've heard people say, and I have not seen this myself, but I've heard people say that one of the Zephyrites in the Medic area, which is just like southwest of the town, I've heard that one of the Zephyrites says that Aaron went crazy after the Master of Peace tried to do something to him with magic. Now, this could be something that just involves the thing that all the Zephyrites go through to be able to master the elements, or this could be something that the Master of Peace specifically did to Aaron for a reason. One way or another, it broke something in his head, and he began to act like Scarlet. And if you notice during the whole instance where you're chasing him down, these vines that no one's able to get past because they have to fight and cut at it while fighting tendrils and all sorts of things, these vines just move out of the way for Aaron and then close back behind him to block you from following him. Also, as I pointed out when we were actually looking at the story instance or explaining it, after you go through these vines, you don't only get jumped by more of the tendrils, which have been all over the place, but you also get jumped by an overgrown husk and overgrown wolves. So different corrupted animals, probably corrupted by Mordremoth himself. So it's pretty safe to assume that Aaron was corrupted by Mordremoth, much like Scarlet. The question still remains, what was it that corrupted him? Was it whatever the Master of Peace exposed him to? Was it something in the Zephyrite cargo? Or was it just that he was a soundless, or he was soundless leaning, and because of that, he didn't have the pale tree protecting him, and so Mordremoth was able to move right in? If that option is true, that does not bode well for the soundless encampment in Caledon, which I went by and tried to check to see if there's any new dialogue, and there's not any for this update. It's also worth noting that Aaron, who is supposedly a master with this blade and able to take out all of these merchants without anyone noticing, and all of them at a time, he never uses a blade on us. He only uses grenades, which he is also supposed to be a master of explosives, but he didn't even try to stab us, and he didn't try to use any type of melee combat, even if you were melee with him. Is it possible that somehow Aaron could be kind of getting set up to look bad? Maybe. But who would try to do that? Is the only one that really makes sense is the Zephyrites themselves. So the Master of Peace, who seems to be the one with the weird agenda here. I'm not really sure who would be doing that if that is true, but that's one thing to keep in mind still. And moving on with that train of thought, let's move on to another character to discuss here, which is the Master of Peace himself. So we know from the last update that the Zephyrites had somewhere they were trying to go. They were loading a bunch of cargo, which was giving off weird readings, and they were trying to get there quickly, and they were in a hurry. On the path to where they were going, which was out west over the Maguuma somewhere, their ship has crashed, which is where we are in Drytop, and the master of the Zephyrites feels this mission is so important that he leaves all of his people wounded and dying to pick up the pieces after him and pick up Glint's legacy, most likely, because that's what they were guarding, and continue on this mission on his own. So now the question is, what is this mission? And is this mission even good? Well, from his current location in the zone, it can be seen that he went from where you start where you come into Drytop up to the Prospector town, most likely to try and buy some supplies, and then immediately went southwest. From where he is in the instance, he leaves in a northwestern direction. Now, this, of course, goes further into the Maguuma Wastes and possibly eventually into the Maguuma jungle itself. It's kind of hard to tell where he's going, considering that it's a whole cavern area or a bunch of crevices that you kind of have to follow the crevices as you go, like how he had to go southwest to eventually go northwest. Either way, he's going farther into the Maguuma, and it can be presumed he's going north. One thing that should be kept in mind is that a lot is brought up during this whole story about how dragons store energy and how magic is their lifeblood, and there's ley lines and all of that going on and on and on. So, what is the most magical thing that you could probably think of? Especially, like, essentially a battery for magic. Well, if you haven't played Guild Wars 1, I can give you a hint here. It's the Bloodstones. The Bloodstones are basically what gives magic to the world. It is what holds magic within it, and was actually used to keep the Titans from coming into into Tyria. But that's a whole other story there, of course. Either way, there are several different Bloodstone and Bloodstone shards scattered around the world. For instance, in Ara, there is one. Ara Path 4 is all about that. And you're probably more acquainted with it because of the Bloodstone dust and the pieces of Bloodstone we use in the Mystic Toilet recipes and Ascended recipes. Either way, the Bloodstones are very powerful artifacts, and there is a known one within the Maguuma, which is to the northwest, I believe. In fact, I think it's pretty far north and a little bit west of where Dry Top is currently. I'm not sure on the exact location, but it could also have moved within the 250 or whatever years since the time we've seen it last. But that's the only artifact that I can think of personally that would attract the Master of Peace to be moving on so quickly. Now, anything the Mersat kind of had could also probably be magical and add to this. And he could be going to the Jungle Dragon itself and trying to put a leash on it and ride it. I don't know. I don't really know his motives. There's very mysterious. We don't really know who he is. All we know is, oh, this is the guy who's in charge of the Zephyrite and who has been the keeper of Glint's legacy. That makes you assume it's a good guy, but maybe it's not, or maybe it's someone who thinks he's doing a good thing, but he's not still. The Master of Peace will be central, I'm sure, going forward in this story, and we will learn more about him. I kind of think he's not really good in what he's currently doing right now, but of course we'll learn that as the story progresses still. And I think that pretty much wraps up what all I want to say about this Living Story update. I have to say I am very, very, very happy with this update. I was going through and doing these story missions, and I kind of was... I expected about halfway through it, I was like, okay, there's another mission? Wow, oh, really, there's another one? And when it finally did hit the point where it said episode 1 finished, I was upset a little bit because I wanted to keep going and see what was going on. It was really compelling. I enjoyed it. And it's a nice change from a lot of the stuff that happened in season 1. I mean, heck, that house that we go into and hear a bunch of stuff about Scarlet, that gives almost more backstory than almost all of season 1 did, and it gives you a nice personal bit from before she became corrupted to give you a little bit more into the character. It answers a nice little mystery in the Steam creatures, even though that wasn't a huge mystery, but it gives us some type of answer, and it still is able to keep the story moving along, making the characters pretty interesting along the way, and also every once in a while getting me to chuckle at something they're saying. I can't really say much wrong with this update, except for, I guess you could complain the zone that they give us is small. But as people have already void jumped out of the map and found the edges of the map, this is about a quarter of the dry top we're going to end up with. And if this kind of update continues on this 2-week release schedule with this kind of quality, I am looking forward to every single one of these updates going forward. Now, where do we think we'll be moving after this update? I believe we'll be moving to more of the current map of Dry Top, which is going to be further west. It might be in a bunch of the mines underneath the town, but we have to find this mine that Scarlet found the ley line in originally. Once we're in this mine, I guess it probably will end up connecting it with some other part of that zone, and we'll be able to travel over to it then. Oh, and one thing I almost forgot to mention is that I love what they also did, which is a lot like the personal story at some points. In fact, even better than the personal story usually was. And that the characters recognize what race you are at several points and what class you are at other points. and give you unique dialogue based on that. It really shines through in Scarlet's house. Like, for instance, if you're an engineer, when you're talking about the steam creature, it gives you extra options to discuss what how rudimentary the design is and all of that. And if you're an Asura to boot, it adds even more on top of that of being an arrogant douche about it. And then when you're talking with Timey at the end, all the different races, like humans or whatever, just have the, well, I don't understand, blah, 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 blah. Asura can throw in that they would help co-author the paper if they had to. And Sylvari can be like, look, Timey, kind of remember that Scarlet was a person, so try to be a little considerate about her. And it all kind of references the stereotypes of the races, which is nice, and it brings in a little bit more personal to it. As well as you, the commander, being referenced as the commander of the pact earlier on, which just, even though it's just a nice little throwaway reference, it makes you feel involved and feel like you've done something. I mean, in my opinion, they've knocked it out of the park with this update, and I am very, very happy. I should throw in here as a reminder for any players who were not able to play during this update. In fact, if you're watching this while the update's going, even if you don't think you're going to be able to log on and play very much, I encourage you to log on. Because as long as you log on for the 2 weeks while this update's on, you will permanently unlock the story journal in your story journal this update, and you can play through it at any time. And you can play it over and over if you'd like. If you did miss this 2 weeks, don't worry. It's still possible, even if you did, to probably find it if you want to online and watch it. But if you want to play it yourself, you can purchase this episode for 200 gems. And 200 gems gets you probably, what, 4 story instances? 3 of them full story instances, 1 of them in Scarlet's house, and also a bunch of in-between stuff to talk to NPCs in the zones. I mean, that's a pretty dang good deal for 200 gems, and I encourage you to do it if you have not played it before. If anything, if you wanted to, you could do it for just the achievement points, I guess, but it's very fun to play through, and I know I enjoyed it a ton. Anyways, that's enough of my ranting and raving about how awesome it is. If you have any theories or any questions you want to add on to what I've been saying, please throw them in the comments down below. I'm going to be gone on vacation for a week, starting today at this point because it's midnight. But so yeah, I'll try and update with something in the annotations and all of that if I missed something, but it might be a little late. And sorry if I missed some stuff. Usually I put a little more time in before I'm trying to make these videos, but like I said, I'm going on vacation, so I'm trying to rush this out so it's not a week and a half after it comes out when the video goes up. And thank you all once again for watching. I'm sorry that I let the channel kind of drop off for a little bit while the Living Story dropped off, but I didn't know what to do. And I just tried to live stream every once in a while, and I'll continue to try and do that whenever I get the chance. It's really fun to do, and hopefully some of you can drop by and bug me in person instead of just bugging me through comments and messages. But yeah, once again, thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoy, and I loved this update. That's my TLDR, and I'll see you next time.